How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined, as always, by my good friend, my co-host from the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Long time no see. It's been approximately 10 minutes since we last recorded our last episode we did. And so just back at it. Just go look at the NFL episode and see how we're doing. But I'm just stoked to be able to hop into some college football because I feel like I'm up to my waist in college football right now in the best sort of way. So I'm happy to be down here right in it. How are you doing, Jack?
Yeah, doing well. It's been a minute since we've talked college football. We were able to talk before conference championship week, I believe. We also were able to talk after conference championship week and after we got the playoff bracket. We weren't able to talk before or between the first round and the second round, but here we are after the quarterfinals. Really able to dive into this and take some time here to talk about these games. And I just want to say all of these games were really, really awesome. And they were awesome in their own way. Sure, you might say, the Indiana beating Alabama 38-3, like, no, that was boring. If you have that opinion, that's your opinion. I still thought it was a really, really interesting and fun game to watch. We had a couple classics in Ole Miss, Georgia, and Miami over Ohio State. And also, despite Oregon shutting out Texas Tech, it was still a really awesome, very competitive game that we're gonna talk about as well. And so we'll get right into it. The first game that happened yesterday on New Year's was the Orange Bowl featuring Oregon and Texas Tech. Oregon being the 5 seed that had beaten James Madison at home in the first round of the playoffs. Oregon's defense had a lot that they felt like they had to prove, especially after giving up 34 points to James Madison's offense at home. A lot of people were saying, like, well, look at all of the second stringers that were in the second half when that happened. And you could make that argument, but if within the locker room, within Oregon's locker room, they were disappointed that that happened, then your argument is a little more obsolete to me. Like, sure, they had some backups in, but the team itself was not happy with that performance, was not making any excuses about having backups in. So they felt like they had a really big chip on their shoulder and a lot to prove on the defensive side of the football. And they did it against a Texas Tech team that was averaging over 35 points a game this year. I think significantly higher than that, but I don't want to say something too crazy that's wrong. So at least averaging at least 35 points a game this year. Team that was 12-1, won the Big 12, blowing out BYU twice. Just a really, really solid Texas Tech squad that had shown a lot of promise, had performed very well against the Big 12. And something that, before Nick, I get your thoughts on this game, I think it's really important that we touch on is a lot of people will look at the score of this game without watching, and they'll be completely ignorant and unlearned on the matter, and will say, "See, the Big 12 is the Big 12 is weak. The Big 12 is a bit sorry excuse for a conference. This and that." The fact is, Texas Tech's defense showed out yesterday. Texas Tech's defense looked phenomenal. Oregon's defense looked even more phenomenal, obviously, shutting down Texas Tech's offense entirely. But even still, Texas Tech's defense did everything that it could to win this game for the Red Raiders, and I think Texas Tech does deserve their flowers. I think they were worthy of their top four finish, being a Power Four conference champion. And doing it the way they did it against a really good BYU team earlier in the year. So all the credit that Texas Tech deserves for how well they played in this season and even in the game yesterday. But in the end, this came down to Oregon's, or it really came down to Oregon's defense, I would say, more than its offense. Nick, what were your big takeaways from this game?
I agree with you there. I think that both of these teams displayed really high-end defense. Obviously, Oregon able to force a number of turnovers in a variety of ways. But the thing is, I think that Oregon is one of the few teams left in this entire tournament that can win in multiple ways, where if their offensive skill players can be healthy, that this offense can be explosive, can be high-end. Dante Moore's a very good quarterback. and their defense can be really, really good. And so I feel like they're one of the few teams left that you can look at that. I say few teams left. There are 4 teams left, and Indiana is obviously really great as well. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that Oregon was a complete team and Texas Tech was an incomplete team. Texas Tech had a really, really great defense and a really, really poor offense. And that's the difference in this game, where if the defenses are similar level, but one offense is so much worse, it's so hard to overcome that. And I joked with you the last couple of weeks, the last couple of months, Marcel Reed is a college quarterback. Marcel Reed, obviously, being the quarterback for Texas A&M. Morton, the quarterback for Texas Tech, I wouldn't even put it Marcel Reed level. That's the difference to me about having – there's NFL quarterbacks where it's like, oh, man, that dude's going to be an NFL dude, somebody like Mendoza at Indiana. Then you have a tier down to me of like, Marcel Reed. He's like a college quarterback. And then you have a tier down of like, oh, that's a quarterback who's on a good team, but like they're not even a quarterback that can be really good in college. They just like are on a really good team. And to me right now, Morton at Texas Tech was that, where he was just a guy, where I feel like you'd see Marcel Reed where he'd be playmaking and doing good stuff for your team, even though he struggled late in the season, of course. But like, to me, when you don't have a dude that can play make from the quarterback position in college, you're not going to be able to win really, really big games unless your team is fantastic everywhere else. And that's really, I think, where this Texas Tech team fell short, that not just their quarterback, but their offense didn't have the requisite playmakers to win this game. And Oregon did. And so I think that this was a defensive struggle, a defensive bout. And I got to give Texas Tech a lot of credit for doing what they did defensively. It was very impressive. Their defense is very well compensated for good reason. It's a very, very good defense, even though it's a Big 12 defense. They're very good.
Yeah, very good defense. A lot of the guys that are on that defense were transfers, which in the new world of NIL and being able to pay players, like, people were complaining about Texas Tech, like paying a lot of money to get their roster around them and everything and whatever. Like, that's just the world that we live in, right? Like it's I mean, if you look at Texas A&M, and I know from having lived in Central Texas, like there are a lot of people shelling out a lot of money for Texas A&M's program. The reason that Jimbo Fisher is not still the coach, despite having literally the biggest contract buyout in college football history, is because of donors to that program, right? So like, that's the way it is everywhere. But a lot of the guys that they brought in were successful outside of the Big 12. We're successful in the Big 10. We're successful in the SEC. So like, I think we need to give it a rest with this comparison of conferences, especially when we look at the bowl results. Like there are a lot of teams that fans were claiming should have been in the playoff that like lost in their bowl game. Like that sort of thing happened a good bit, right? So like I think we just need to ease up on that. Nick, a question that I think is an important one to ask after this game. Because of the way that this player's performance was significantly below the norm for what he did this year. And it was the first time really outside of, one, maybe 2 games that he was playing against really good opponents. I think we need to ask, should Dante Moore go back to Oregon for one more year? He was 26 of 33, which is a decent percentage. It's around 70%. So that's good. Only 234 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick. He got sacked quite a few times. This is the type of game that makes you just start to think, especially now in the era of NIL, like, there's a chance that he could make as much money in one more year at Oregon as he would in his first year as a rookie, and potentially have a much better, get even better, be a, no doubt number 1 overall pick, the following year. On top of that, he is very inexperienced in terms of games started. So another year under his belt, while still being as young as he is something that might be worthwhile, to really solidify himself there. I don't know. I think it's just a question worth asking after he, struggled a little bit against probably the second best defense that he faced all season yesterday.
I think that Dante Moore, it probably is in his best interest to go back to school. I think that it's a very, very fine line with a player like that, where if he went into this NFL draft, I think he would clearly be a top 5 pick and probably be the number 2 overall pick. Mendoza going 1 and Moore going 2. But the thing is, it like you joked about in our previous episode when we were talking about the NFL about like, oh, the Malik Willis signing with the Jets is going to hit like crack when it happens. There are teams that you want to avoid, like a team like the Jets, like what Eli Manning did with the Chargers back in the day, like what John Elway did with the Colts back in the day, where you want to avoid going to those teams. And I think it's a really reasonable question, because if Dante Moore comes out this year, he's going to be a top 3 pick. If Dante Moore comes out next year, I think he's going to be a top 3 pick, maybe probably number 1, but you really don't know. But the real question is, if you're going to come out and be a top 5 pick either way at the quarterback position, would you rather be worse or would you rather be better? Because probably what the gamble is could he have a terrible year next year? I think that the answer would be really heavily no, he wouldn't have a bad year next year. Their offensive skill position players are very young. They always have an influx of money coming in from their donors. They're always going to be able to have a really talented team. And Dante Moore is a young quarterback that always, with young quarterbacks in college, the more starts you get, the more pro ready you seem to be when you go to the NFL. I think that there's really no reason not to stay in school one more year unless you just want to get your NFL career kind of started. Because the thing is, this year, you go to the Jets or to the Raiders or to whoever, the Browns, whatever team you want to pick out for him. But next year, what teams are going to be picking up there? The Browns, the Raiders, the Jets, the whoever. And it's always these bad teams that you're going to want to avoid. So it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, as far as avoiding bad teams, because bad teams are always going to pick great players because that's the way it works. So Dante Moore, I don't think, should be going back to school to avoid terrible teams. He should go back to school to develop himself to be better, and because he thinks he can win at Oregon, and I think he can win at Oregon. He potentially could win the whole thing this year at Oregon.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's probably in his best interest to stay if it were me.
Yeah. I just the reason I brought it up is because that stat line yesterday, like it just got me thinking and got me to look into like some of his other game stretches, this year, in terms of what he did. And it was really, I, I just felt like it was really telling. Now, again, this is coming from me. I did not watch a ton of Oregon football this year. They're on the West Coast. I watched what I could. I watched the Penn State game. I watched the USC game. I watched the Washington game. I watched a good bit of this game yesterday. But it's really, really interesting if you just take some of these games against the higher quality opponents that Oregon faced this year and look at his stats for those. So running through them, I picked out 6 games: Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, USC, Washington, and Texas Tech. Obviously, Texas Tech, USC, Iowa, and Indiana were all ranked wins. Wisconsin and Washington were not, but Wisconsin and Washington were both still bowl eligible teams this year. But even still, like, they weren't ranked wins even, so like, just to take that into account. Against Indiana, he was 21 of 34 for 186 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Against Wisconsin, he was 9 of 15 for 86 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 picks. Against Iowa, 13 of 21, 112 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick. Now, he did have quite the drive there at the end of the game to march down the field and kick a field goal to win it, but still, 112 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick is not great. Against USC, 22 of 30, 257 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. So decent, but again, that pick in there is, makes you scratch your head a little bit. Against Washington, 20 of 29, 286 yards, one touchdown, zero picks. That is the first of any of these, and I'm like, okay, that is a quality start. He was efficient throwing the football, had almost 300 yards, and took care of the football. And then yesterday against Texas Tech, 26 of 33, 234 yards, zero touchdowns, one pick. And so I feel like when I look at those, right, when I look at his game logs, removing the game against Montana State and Oklahoma State and Northwestern and Oregon State and Rutgers and Penn State, because even though he played well, we came to find out what Penn State actually was. So like you could look earlier in this year, see, wow, Oregon went on the road to the number 3 team in the country. He was 29 of 39 for 248 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Well, that number 3 team in the country ended up going 6-6 and won the Pinstripe Bowl against Clemson. That was that team's fate, right? So like, you know, um, but anyway, when you look at the probably the top 6 opponents that Oregon has faced this year, and you look at his stats in those games, it's like, okay, well, in all 6 of those games, he had 4 touchdowns and 5 picks. That makes you just question a little bit. And I think if I was now, granted, I am far from an NFL GM, right? Like the farthest thing from it, probably. That's not true. I watch football. There are people who don't watch football, so they would be farther than I am, but still, right? That's still something that I think would give me pause. You only have one full year of starts. You did have a handful of starts at your previous stop, but this is your first full year of starts, and against the best opponents that you played this year, these were your totals. Um, that would just give me a little pause and a little hesitation. It would make me think, are we this desperate to get a quarterback this year that we're willing to use a top 3 pick on this guy, or are we willing to wait to put that much draft capital into a quarterback, willing to draft, a Trinidad Chambliss in the 3rd round or something like that, see what he can do, and if it works out, we look like geniuses, and if not, we haven't invested much. But then next year, when we see Arch Manning come out, and whoever else it might be, Brendan Sorsby, the Cincinnati transfer that everyone really, really likes, like that, when that happens, okay, now I'm willing to invest heavily in a quarterback.
I hear you. I do agree that it's a good bit of projection with him right now, that he has not had the Joe Burrow college type season where he's put it all together and it's unbelievable. Obviously, nobody else has really.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen dudes who they've been good, they've been good, they've been good, and then they have a variety of weapons. The team's really good, and they put up incredible stats. His stats haven't been incredible this year in a lot of these big games. But the thing is, I think the player who he is, the poise he has, the talent he has, he might not be an elite scrambler, but he can move a good bit. I do still think that his ability to be a professional, strong enough arm, mobile enough, his ability to deliver the football and be clutch, that he has all of the ability that you want as far as like, I think he has a very high floor. But the thing is, I think that he could have an even higher floor if he stayed in college one more year and we see what his ceiling looks like. Because I don't think we've seen what his ceiling looks like statistically, what like an incredible offense led by Dante Moore could be. Because I think it could very much be like a CJ Stroud at Ohio State, where it's like, oh, he's a really good player. We don't really know how great he is. And then right at the end of his career, when they finally unleash him in the play, it was the playoff game, I believe, was one of his last games that he played, that he absolutely went bonkers and threw a whole bunch of touchdowns and ran all over the place and was great. I just think that the unleashed Dante Moore we haven't quite seen yet. And so I think that his potential is much higher than where it's at right now. And so I think that other folks can see that. I think they're smarter than me. And I think because they're smarter than me, they know this is why he's a really good prospect, because of the ceiling that he hasn't reached yet. So that's where I'm at with that.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I just think, there is a chance that he explores his draft opportunities, or his agent has his ear to the ground, right? And is hearing stuff that just makes you think like, hey, maybe go back. There's still a lot of there's still a lot of really good guys on this roster that are going to be back. Not to mention all of the awesome guys that Dan Lanning has in his recruiting class going into next season that might be worth going back, having a much better year against the top talent and the not top talent. In a way that really solidifies him, as well as he could still earn, like the quarterback for Duke, Darian Mensah. If like Duke were to win the ACC and he were to win the Heisman and they were to go to the college football playoff, win a playoff game, like if all of the things that are built into his contract were to happen, he would make like over $4 million in a year.
Mhm.
I could see a world where Dante Moore could get a contract like that from Oregon, and all of those things actually happen because it's Oregon, it's not Duke.
Mhm.
So just, I think it's something worth keeping an eye on. Okay, moving on to the other side of the bracket that feeds into the next game. Oregon will be playing against Indiana, a rematch from earlier in the year, because Indiana absolutely obliterated Alabama in the Rose Bowl yesterday. It was it was a demolition unlike anything I've ever seen, especially or anything I've ever seen because it happened against Alabama. I mean, sure, there are plenty of games. Every year there are games where top teams destroy teams that people still think are really good, but clearly are not on that level. But Alabama is normally the team that's doing the demolishing, not the not the other way around. Um, Indiana just had their way with Alabama. Everything Indiana wanted to do, they were successful at. Fernando Mendoza was 14 of 16 for 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. He had more touchdowns than he had incompletions. Granted, he only threw the ball 16 times, but that's all he had to do. The running game was incredibly strong. They ran as a team for 215 yards on 50 carries. Um, they just looked really good. They didn't turn the ball over. They were not penalized very much. Like this Indiana team, and I have a question that I'll get your take on here in a little bit. Um, but this Indiana team looked like we were used to seeing the Nick Saban Alabama teams looking like.
Mhm.
Kurt Signetti does come from the Nick Saban coaching tree. Granted, it was a long time ago, but still, like that's stuff that gets ingrained with you when you're under the staff of a guy like that. You're gonna remember those things and you're going to apply them to what you've got. So Nick, how do you feel about what were your immediate reactions to this Alabama Indiana Rose Bowl, and what are your thoughts about Indiana moving forward?
Indiana, it's oh my gosh. Kurt Signetti, first and foremost, I want to give him all the credit in the world because this is a top-down sort of organization. This is a team that Kurt Signetti, the staff, the players, there's clearly a culture here that permeates everywhere. This is a team where everybody's rooting for everyone else. Everybody holds each other to a standard. They want to be perfect. They want to dominate other teams. They don't want to be weak anywhere. They don't want to have a poor run game, a poor run defense, bad special teams, bad tackling. They want to be good at everything. They are good at
Mm-hmm.
everything. They have no weaknesses. They're just so tight on the screws on every single little thing. The offensive MVP of the game being their center, like that is just what they are. They
Mm-hmm.
down to the littlest things, their toughness, their ability in the trenches, their ability to not jump off sides when Alabama's trying to get them to jump off sides, their ability to run the ball when they want to, their ability to hit the big play when they want to. They played this game completely on their terms. If you can say this is what we are going to do and do it, you win football games. Alabama couldn't say this is what we want to do and do anything, and Indiana could. This was a top to bottom win. This was a win that there was no coin flip, no chance, no flags, no penalties, no anything that could change the outcome of this game. This was just a team that went to work and a team that couldn't stand up to the bully This is not a Cinderella story anymore. They should be the favorites because they are the best. Like if somebody told me a year ago when Indiana was really good, next year Indiana is going to be even better. Their quarterback's going to be even more unbelievable. They're going to beat Alabama and destroy them. Like it's just unbelievable, man. This Indiana team, nobody could have dreamed of months ago, let alone years ago. Like this Indiana team just absolutely smoked Alabama in fashion that we have never seen before.
Yeah, I totally agree. So here's my question. And then after this we'll transition to talking a little bit more about Alabama in response to this. Do you think do you think that Indiana can become a dynasty, a true dynasty, or do you think that this year, and again, we're speaking I mean, there's a chance I would be surprised at this point, but there's a chance that they lose to Oregon next week, right? And that's the end of this. However, from what we saw yesterday, this does not look like a team that's going to get pushed around by anybody here on out the rest of this season. So, but adding that obvious caveat that it's not like they've won the national championship. I know, having watched the game yesterday and watched the post-game ceremonies, that the team is excited about the win, but as of right now, Kurt Signetti is already preparing for Oregon, and this team is already preparing for Oregon. They're not still resting on their laurels from yesterday. However, because I think it's worth saying, do you think Indiana can become a dynasty, or do you think that this will be more like LSU's incredible season that they had in 2019 into the 2020 playoff? That was a 1 year and an amazing year, probably the best year in college football history, but was just a 1 year blip on the radar.
That's a really cool question. I just think the way that we got to look at LSU versus Alabama versus Indiana, it's pretty easy for me to dissect, in my opinion. Alabama, incredible coaching at all the levels, incredible talent acquisition from other schools with transfers, and incredible ability to get players from high school, develop them, have depth. That LSU team got Joe Burrow from Ohio State, but primarily it was Stingley being unbelievable, Justin Jefferson being unbelievable, Jamar Chase being unbelievable, CEH being incredible that year, and their coordinator being really good. But their head coach obviously was not what this Indiana head coach is, what Saban was. It's just different. Orgeron's just different. And then you look at this Indiana team where it's like, okay, Indiana, incredible coaching staff, incredible ability to build a culture and toughness like Alabama, incredible ability to scout and develop talent from other schools. But the big separator to me with Indiana that we just don't know is, can they recruit and get the 5 stars on 5 stars and 5 stars that Alabama could? Because Alabama's ability to get just ridiculous talent year over year over year, where they had top recruiting classes all over the place. They had third string offensive tackles and corners that were NFL caliber players because that was the era pre-NIL. I just don't know if you can be a dynasty anymore in this NIL era. And so I would actually lean more towards dynasty because we don't know. Because the thing is, the coaching similarities between Signetti and Saban and the ability to scout talent from other teams and develop those players is very similar. So I feel like that similarity is closer than it would be between that LSU team, where although Mendoza and Burrow both having great seasons in both transfers, I just think that it's different when LSU had a level of talent that this Indiana team doesn't. This Indiana team doesn't have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CEH, Derek Stingley. Like, they don't have those dudes. If they had those dudes and Fernando Mendoza, this team will be unbelievable. And they already are incredible. Like, this team is really talented, but it's not those Alabama teams or those LSU teams. But we don't know if those teams can be built anymore in this era. We just don't know that. So it's hard to know. But I would lean more dynasty because the coach, because the ability to get talent from other teams because of the culture and the toughness. That's the similarity I see.
Yeah, the thing I think it's really interesting you bring up the recruiting. Just pulling up their sort of recruiting history here. So the class of 2024, that would have been the first recruiting class that Kurt Signetti was there for. Now, granted, he was hired in like December of that year, so there's only so much that we can say about that recruiting class. But still, he was certainly involved with that. That recruiting class overall was 46. Okay, they had one 4-star recruit. This is according to 247 Sports. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that was 2024. In 2025, their recruiting class was ranked 39. They had another, again, just one 4-star recruit. Looking ahead to this year's 2026 recruiting class, 33, two 4-star recruits. It is slowly but surely happening with them. I think also something that you cannot ignore with this team is I think this Indiana team probably better than anybody that we've seen in the modern NIL and transfer portal, um, the modern NIL transfer portal era, is able to find talent in the portal and get the most out of it. Typically, right now, what we're seeing in the portal is we're seeing a lot of these smaller schools. You see a brand name like an LSU, a kid from LSU goes in the portal, and you see these smaller schools that jump and are like, "Ooh, look, we got a guy from LSU. That means he must be good." And it's like, not necessarily. You also see these big schools, your Ohio States, your Alabamas, your LSUs, go and try to poach some of the guys from the smaller schools, and sometimes it works, like in the case of Tennessee getting Joey Aguilar from UCLA. That seemed to have worked out. I mean, Joey Aguilar, he wasn't like competing for the Heisman or anything, but it worked. Better example, Ole Miss getting Trinidad Chambliss from Ferris State. That said, they brought him in as their backup quarterback, not their starter. But still, those are examples of that working. But often you see these guys that like they were the best guy at Coastal Carolina. They go to Florida State, they struggle, and then they end up at like UTEP, right? Like that's typically how that is playing out. The majority, that's how that's playing out. Indiana just keeps hitting with these guys. They just keep hitting with them. It's not just the talent acquisition, it is the player development that is just incredible. And I think that we'll see after this year Indiana have a significant jump in the recruiting rankings because last year there were a lot of people that thought last year was a fluke, right? Indiana played a softer Big Ten schedule. They got to the playoff and Notre Dame really sort of punched the lights out on them. This is a very different, right? This is incredibly different. I mean, the fact that we're seeing some of the top quarterbacks in the college football that are entering the portal and they're in communication with Indiana to be Fernando Mendoza's successor, right? Like when Josh Hoover, the quarterback at TCU, who is like an all Big 12 quarterback, is going in the portal hoping to be Fernando Mendoza's successor at IU. Normally, that guy's jumping in the portal to go be the quarterback at USC, at Florida State, at Notre Dame, at Miami, right? It is very significant. And so I think that if this year continues, and again, they still have to win 2 more games to win this national championship, right? So again, we don't want to belittle what they still have left and what's still in front of them before they can reach their final goal. However, it's hard to look at a team that goes and beats Alabama on a neutral field 38-3 yesterday, and not think that the only one getting in their way of winning it all is themselves. I think the high school recruiting might catch up with the success now that it's like, oh no, we're proven, right? Like we're proven. Signetti has proven to the university and to the alumni base, like, no, we're legit. And with that will come more money going to them. The more success they have here in the playoff, the more money that's going to come to them. The more success they have for the Big Ten, the more the Big Ten is going to give them money. The more assets they will have to be able to go and get these guys. Like it just looks like a snowball right now. That just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it feels like it's getting bigger and bigger, and we're still in year 2 with Cignetti at IU, which is just crazy.
Couldn't agree with you more. It's just different, man. Cignetti, that dude said, "Oh man, this year will make a great movie," and like it already seems like the story is done. Like this Indiana team somehow feels inevitable. But the thing is, what's crazy is I don't think it'll go to their head. They just obliterated Alabama, who was a dynasty for a decade. And I think that they are such pros that they're just going to walk in and go, yeah, we beat Alabama, but next week we're going to obliterate Oregon. And the week after, we're going to obliterate another team. Like we are just there to punch other dudes in the mouth and do our job. And that's crazy. It's crazy that Indiana's walking in and knocking people's lights out like that, man. Insane.
Yeah, it's nuts. All right. Moving on to easily the game of the second round. Just in terms of the way it all played out, it was an instant classic, and that was the Sugar Bowl. It was the last game yesterday, and it featured Ole Miss and Georgia. And Ole Miss came into this game with one loss on the season. That loss came to Georgia earlier in the year. So all eyes were pointed on, this game, thinking, Georgia's already beaten Ole Miss this year. Ole Miss has a first-time head coach in Pete Golding now with Lane Kiffin's departure. Surely this will be, a win for Georgia. And Ole Miss stepped up to the challenge. And it's not like Ole Miss was got ahead and just sort of kept Georgia at bay. Like, no, there were multiple times that Ole Miss was behind, and then they'd get the lead, and then Georgia would come back and take the lead, and then Ole Miss would fight back. Like they legit went blow for blow this whole game. And it really kind of came down to who was going to have the ball last, and that was Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss going down the field and kicking a field goal with 10 seconds left to win it, or to go up 37-34. Then there was the last second safety thing that happened because of the penalties on all the laterals. So the final score ended up as 39-34, but regardless, it was a clear Ole Miss victory over Georgia, getting the Georgia monkey off their back. Because that was sort of the thing under Lane Kiffin, was he would have these great years, but he wouldn't beat Alabama and he wouldn't beat Georgia, and he wouldn't beat LSU, like those types of games. So really, really massive win for the University of Mississippi, and for this football team. And now they are moving on to face Miami next week in the Fiesta Bowl, which should be an awesome game. We'll talk about Miami, Ohio State here in a few minutes. Nick, what was your biggest takeaway from this Ole Miss Georgia game?
My biggest takeaway with Ole Miss versus Georgia, first and foremost, man, I was texting you last night. I talked with you a couple months ago, man. Trinidad Chambliss, man. Before I was just like, this dude can play. I don't know what sort of player he ends up being, but this dude is a player, and he played yesterday incredibly well. His mobility is awesome. His arm talent is awesome. His deep ball accuracy is awesome. He has so many traits that I love to have in a quarterback, and he was a big reason why you can trust this Ole Miss team. This Ole Miss team, though, played really complimentary football in key spots where Chambliss had a number of drops where a number of his receivers were dropping fastballs. Lacey, their running back, Hugh Lacey, he fumbled early in the game. Him fumbling, I'm like, okay, here's Georgia. They just got this fumble 6 against an Ole Miss team that Ole Miss can't play with Georgia. We know that Georgia, even though they haven't been able to get good offense throughout the game, it's like, oh, man, Georgia's inevitable. Their defense is going to come around. They're going to start getting stops. They're going to make plays here. And then Chambliss kept fighting back. Lacey was running really hard. They were making clutch third down plays. They were able to get passes deep down the field. They were able to get timely stops with the defense late in that game. That defense made some really critical stops. Even though there were massive coaching issues at the end of the first half, I was like, you just completely botched getting 3 points here at the end of this first half with the offense running off the field and the kicking team running onto the field and it being a whole mess because they threw to the outside and then the player stayed in. And I was like, what are you doing? That was ridiculous. But even with some of those coaching issues and with Kirby Smart coaching really well with a fake punt that turned into 3 points for them, that those 3 points were really critical late in that game, it was just really impressive overall football. And when you're playing football against a team where they're making miraculous plays, where Gunnar Stockton is getting folded in half and looks like he should have broken bones and damage to his entire body, and you're having unbelievable plays from him, and you get the fumble 6 as Georgia, and still you're playing better than them in a variety of ways. It was just insanely impressive, considering there were a number of things that went against them with turnovers, with a couple of calls late in that game. The refs made a couple of bad calls late in that game. The pass interference call on Ole Miss that was deep down the left sideline where the receiver was grabbing the DB and they called it on the DB. I'm just like, what are you doing?
Yep. And then there was the missed face mask.
He was pulling the face mask call, bunch of bad calls there. For Ole Miss to overcome what was a game that they would traditionally lose was really, really impressive to me. Mm-hmm. Gunnar Stockton, very impressive as well. That dude, I always look back on Jaden Daniels at LSU, how he would get hit and he would look like a cartoon character. He would look silly, flying all over the place, getting hit because he's so skinny. Gunnar Stockton was getting folded play after play after play, completing unbelievable passes. And I watched that game and I was like, Chambliss is way better. Chambliss is just the better quarterback. Like Gunnar Stockton, like he's making ridiculous plays and somehow not getting hurt. And I'm just like, Chambliss is just better. He's just clearly better in my eyes. And it was an incredible duel. It was an all-time sort of quarterback duel in that game there.
Yeah, and I think something else that like cannot be understated, Ole Miss's offensive line deserves so much credit. Mm-hmm. Trinidad Chambliss never got sacked in this game. Do you know what it takes to keep a Kirby Smart Georgia defense from recording a sack? I mean, and to be fair, a lot of that credit also needs to go to Trinidad Chambliss. He had a few insane circus plays, but even still, like there are times that like even the quarterback can't get out of the way, right? There's a free rusher that there's nothing that the quarterback can do in those situations. But the Ole Miss offensive line played incredibly well. Ole Miss ran the ball not super efficiently, but efficiently enough for what they were trying to do. They ran the ball well enough that they were able to set up some stuff for Trinidad Chambliss to do throwing the football. Just all around a super duper impressive performance from the Ole Miss Rebels. So I feel like this just begs the question. Did Lane Kiffin make the wrong choice leaving Ole Miss? I mean, it's hard to not think about it, right? Now, on the one hand, Ole Miss may end up being better off because of it, because again, we already talked about, Lane Kiffin couldn't win these types of games. But still, this is, this feels like the second time now that we've seen a coach leave a program where they've had lots of success to go to LSU with the idea that they will have more success there because there's more opportunity, there's more resources, stuff like that, just to turn around and as soon as they've left, the other team is having success. With Notre Dame, they were playing for a national championship last year, right? Brian Kelly left Notre Dame to go to LSU. He's like, well, I want to be at a place where I can actually win a championship. Did not have the success there, got fired. Lane Kiffin leaves Ole Miss, goes to LSU, says a lot of the same things. I want to be at a place where, I can have the resources I need to be successful coaching for a national championship. And yet here we are, Ole Miss is a game away, a game against a Miami team that might be the hottest team in the country, but even still came into this as the number 10 seed. So they are on what we would call a Cinderella run for sure. There's a chance that Ole Miss is one game away, or not a chance. Ole Miss is one game away from competing for a national championship. So that said, Nick, do you think Lane Kiffin made the wrong decision leaving Ole Miss to go to LSU?
I don't know that it'd be the wrong decision, but I think this is one of those scenarios of maybe a lose kind of scenario where I think that Lane Kiffin is such a volatile person and coach where it's going to be hard for him to find top end win a championship type of success. It's just really hard to be able to do that when you are a head coach that is as volatile as he is. It's difficult. With that being said, this is an unbelievable season from Ole Miss that it's hard to think that him being there for longer could be better because this kind of feels inevitable that because Lane Kiffin is Lane Kiffin, even if he stayed, would he leave 1 year from now, 2 years from now? It feels like him leaving is inevitable because him leaving everywhere is inevitable because he's Lane Kiffin. That being said, LSU might have been better off hiring somebody else than hiring Lane Kiffin. But the thing is, Lane Kiffin seemed like the best option where I feel like Ole Miss and LSU and Lane Kiffin are kind of all losers here, where Ole Miss gets this Cinderella sort of run where they're in the semifinals right now and they got a shot at a national championship. But I don't think Lane Kiffin staying here necessarily elevates this team, even though hypothetically it should with the offensive mind he is, with the ability to not let things blow up in his face like a end of the first half 3-point kind of swing play. I doubt that's as likely what would have happened if he was there. I do think that it probably doesn't change the fate of this Ole Miss team. This Ole Miss team probably won't win the national championship no matter how the rest of this season goes. They have two incredibly tough games here with the Miami team that has played incredibly well, has been incredibly hot. And then they'd be playing either an Oregon team that just took down Indiana or an Indiana team that's been unbelievable. But I just don't see what the path is to a national championship for Ole Miss with or without Lane Kiffin. And I don't see it going incredibly well for him at LSU. So I don't feel like I have much of a weight here where it all just feels like the same to me. It all feels
Yeah.
like the same sort of what's going to happen everywhere. Even though LSU and Lane Kiffin should have an incredibly high ceiling, it's such a hard gamble to gamble on Lane Kiffin staying somewhere long enough to get enough recruits to have an unbelievable team to win the whole thing, like he should be able to do at LSU if everything breaks right. Because it's hard for everything to break right with Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I saw something that was really interesting, or really funny. It was someone posted saying like this is Lane Kiffin, and it was a clip from an episode of Family Guy where basically they're there and it's like they've just won a boat, and the guy in this game show is like, or do you want the mystery box? And Peter's like, hold on, the mystery box. It could be anything. It could be a boat. You know how much we've always wanted a boat, and so he takes the mystery box, and it's like I feel like that is such an accurate representation of this whole Lane Kiffin situation. Like, there is no guarantee that you're going to get what you think you're going to get at LSU. And on top of that, you had you had it all at Ole Miss, right? You had this team. Ole Miss was basically willing to give you whatever you wanted to stay as their head coach, and you decided no, you were leaving, you were going to LSU. We already talked about that whole situation. Um, so I don't know. It's hard to crown Pete Golding already after seeing him coach 2 games. However, the win that they had last night was not just any game. Like it was a game that hit like notoriously Lane Kiffin never got.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to sit here and go, no, Ole Miss wishes they still had Lane Kiffin. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
sit here and say Ole Miss is so glad that Lane Kiffin is gone. It's like we can't really answer that yet, but what
Mm-hmm.
can be said without a doubt is that the success that Ole Miss has had in the regular season was due to Lane Kiffin. But what they've had in the postseason has been due to Pete Golding, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic that we'll have to see moving forward.
Mhm.
Because also, like, it's not like the staff that is there right now or the team that is there right now is going to be held over to next year. You know, Trinidad Chambliss has applied for a waiver to get one more year, but even if he gets it, I mean, it would not shock me if he immediately enters the portal and goes to LSU, right? Ole Miss's offensive coordinator, who coached, in my opinion, a phenomenal game last night, called a phenomenal game last night for Ole Miss. He is already LSU's offensive coordinator. It's just he was allowed to come back, to continue doing his job as OC for Ole Miss for the playoff run. Um,
Mhm.
so it's hard to say. Um, it would be insane to think about, like, make a 30 for 30 about it 15 years from now. If Ole Miss were to like win the national championship this year and then like fall off the planet because of Lane Kiffin being gone and everything, like that would just be really, really fascinating to just kind of see that dynamic. But regardless, a massive win for Ole Miss. Huge shout out to them. Shout out to Trinidad Chambliss having an unbelievable game, and also big shout out to Pete Golding for, regardless of how it ends up for him at Ole Miss, getting a signature win like that is super duper impressive, especially in your first head coaching experience whatsoever.
Mhm.
Moving on
For sure.
to moving on to the kind of the shocker of the week in terms of who won. I don't think Indiana beating Alabama was a shock. How bad they beat Alabama was a shock. But of all of the games, this is the one that I think um, is the most surprising. I really like listening to Josh Pate and his podcast. He was saying there's a world where Trinidad Chambliss balls out and Ole Miss beats Georgia. Um, but not many people were willing to say Miami will beat Ohio State. They're willing to say this is going to be a good game. They're willing to say that 9.5 points favoring Ohio State as the spread was one that you should definitely bet on Miami, but they were still also saying that Ohio State would win this game. Um, that said, Miami Miami just overtook the Buckeyes in a way that was similar to what the Hoosiers did to the Crimson Tide in the Rose Bowl yesterday, except that Ohio State was supposed to be a much better team than Miami. Um, this game was really, really surprising. Uh, I think Miami might have the best defense in college football right now, or at least the hottest defense in college football right now. They're getting good at the right time. And they're getting good enough that Carson Beck can have a stat line of 19 for 26 for 138 yards and one touchdown. And that's fine against Ohio State. You'd be shocked to think that that was going to be enough to beat Ohio State by double digits, let alone just beat them at all. And it was because Miami's defense totally shut down the Buckeyes in some pretty spectacular ways. On top of getting some large, some key moment plays go their way as well, stuff like that. Nick, what was your biggest takeaway from the Miami Ohio State game?
I just think Miami's physicality was a shock to see against an Ohio State team that has established being a physical team the last couple of years. That's how they were finally able to deal with playing on the same field as Michigan when Michigan won the national championship. They were able to establish a level of physicality with their running backs last year that they were not able to this year. Their ability to Miami stopping a run game for Ohio State where their offensive line and their running backs weren't able to do much. The passing game with Jeremiah Smith was great. The pick six, though, that he allowed by not being able to seal his block, I do blame Smith for not being able to make that block. Dude, you're
100%.
the best player on the field. There are three blockers there blocking for one dude, and you just need to slow down that DB. You don't even need to like full on get two hands on him. You don't need to hold him up or anything. You just need to throw your arms into him, slow him down for a second. But man, you can't allow a pick six like that to happen. That swung momentum there. Mark Fletcher, the running back for Miami, runs physically. That offensive line
Stud.
opens up holes for him. Man, even The unbelievable thing to me was that Georgia got the timely fumble 6 against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss was still able to win. In this game, Miami, Mark Fletcher fumbles the ball, and then Ohio State has it early in the game, and they don't score off of it. It's like this is an Ohio State team that is the favorite, that's unbelievable, that might be the best team in the nation, everybody thinks, and you just got a fumble against a team that in Miami was lucky to get into the dance, and they just aren't able to capitalize off of a critical fumble by Fletcher. That to me was unbelievable with these games when the better, more talented team gets plays and turnovers made right into their breadbasket and they can't capitalize off of it. That was shocking to me for these underdogs to be able to win despite not playing perfectly clean football. Mm-hmm. The edge rushers for Miami were unbelievable against Ohio State. Sonny Styles, who I think is an amazing linebacker for Ohio State, the physicality that Miami was able to impose that Sonny Styles wasn't able to match, I think was an issue. I think that Carson Beck played efficiently, even if it wasn't spectacular. Saying with the pick 6 and then the late interception, you just got to capitalize more on making decisions on when to run, when to pass, being able to make the right passes. Saying wasn't able to do that. It was just a professional-like win for Miami where your run game, your defense, an efficient passing game, that's how traditional teams win. Complementary passing, physical running, defense that's stifling. That's a Miami win that I don't think people expected, that Ohio State couldn't match a classic-style football team, and edge rushers just dominating Ohio State at the point of attack, man. Very impressive by Miami.
Yeah, I saw something going into this week, and I thought it was really true, and really well put. That Indiana rushed in the Big Ten championship game. Indiana rushed for 118 yards against Ohio State, and someone said Miami is a better running back, has better running backs, has a better offensive line than Indiana. Better offensive line, I don't know about that, especially with what we saw from Indiana, yesterday, but still a physically more gifted offensive line, sure. They also said that Indiana held Ohio State to only 58 yards rushing, and that Indiana had in that game 5 sacks against Ohio State, and that Miami has a much better defensive line and a much better and a much better run defense. And that I do think is true. And they held Ohio State to only 45 yards rushing, and they had 5 total sacks. So, honestly, there's a world where you can say, well, the writing was kind of on the wall. But also, it's Ohio State, right? Ohio State was 3 points away from being the number 1 overall seed. They lost to Indiana. They were they started the season at number 3. They beat Texas week 1, and they sat at number 1 the entirety of the rest of the year until they lost to Indiana, which dropped them to number 2. And here comes Miami, a very hot Miami team, but also hot in terms of wins at the right time, but not necessarily hot in terms of they beat Texas A&M the previous week, but they beat them 10-3, right? It's not like they lit them up, they scored 35 points, and they held them to 10. It was still a close game. It was a game that came down to one drive late in the fourth quarter where they scored a touchdown with under 2 minutes to go to win that game, right? But still, this Miami team is very opportunistic. They are built the right way to be competitive at this point in the season. A weird but funny comparison to that I can think of is when I was in high school, we used to do this big Relay for Life day at the end of the year, and all the money you raised went to Relay for Life, but it was like this sort of like Olympics type thing where you go around and play all these games, stuff like that. And the top 8 teams, the top 8 point getters would then go into a bracket for tug of war at the very end, that would decide who won it all. And my junior year, there's a team that had some of my buddies on it, and they were literally like, we are just building the team that'll be best at tug of war, and we think we'll be good enough to get there, and then when we will, no one will be able to beat us. And that's what happened. And I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing with Miami right now. Is they're like, we're going to build a team that can run the football, and we're going to build a team that can stop the run and can get in the backfield when the quarterback drops back. And we know that that's what will play come the playoff if we can get there. Whether they intentionally decided to do that or not, probably not, but still, that's kind of how it's playing out right now. And it leads me, Nick, to ask you this question: can Miami do the unthinkable and like finish this thing? Like right now, it's I think that Trinidad Chambliss is definitely the best quarterback that they will have faced probably all year. Certainly in the playoffs. Like looking back at who they've played, like there really isn't anybody, that I'm looking at and seeing here that would be, that would be on that level. Um, of Trinidad Chambliss. So like, that they've competed against all year. So like there is that. But that said, like that was supposed to be the case for Julian Sayin. That was supposed to be the case for Marcel Reed, and they made them look, their talent was very negligible. So it makes you wonder, like, is is Miami like the biggest threat to Indiana right now? Like, I
I
don't
think they
know.
are.
Yeah,
I think the answer is yes, because the way it plays out for me is, can they beat Ole Miss? Yes. I can solidly say they can beat Ole Miss. Will they beat Ole Miss? That's a different question, but they for sure can. Can they beat Oregon? I think they can beat Oregon with the same formula that they just used to beat Ohio State. I think it will be the exact same formula of physical, stop the run, get after the passer, force Dante Moore to make mistakes like Julian Sayin was making, where Julian Sayin's played very well, but hasn't been able to elevate as a quarterback. I think you can make Dante Moore do that. The issue is, can they beat Indiana? I don't think they necessarily would. I think Indiana's offensive line's good enough, and Fernando Mendoza and the receivers would be able to win that game. But the thing is, they don't necessarily have to beat Indiana to win this, because I think Oregon has a shot to beat Indiana. And so I think that if we're asking, can Miami win this whole thing? I think the answer is yes. But I think if the question is, can they beat Indiana? I think the answer is probably no. And that's the interesting thing, that the way things fall could shake into their favor. But I also think that they could possibly lose to Ole Miss. I think that it's a difficult path, but one they could do. But it would be incredible if they could. But any of these teams, I'd be ecstatic if any of these teams won. Even if Indiana, who are the favorite, if they won, it will be so exciting to see Indiana win a national championship
for sure.
with the corpses that they left on the floor throughout the season, beating Oregon, beating Alabama, like beating Penn State at that point, like Indiana beating Ohio State for the Big Ten championship. Like, they will have taken down so many monsters, and they're Indiana, even if they win it, let alone if Ole Miss or Miami or Oregon win it. It's going to be unbelievable no matter what happens. And that's the absolute coolest thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like Miami. Okay, let me put it this way. Right now, if I had to place money on it, I'm placing money on Miami to beat Ole Miss. Because I think Miami's defense right now is better than Georgia's defense. And I think that Miami's run game is good enough to overcome I think it's good enough to shorten the game so Trinidad Chambliss gets less touches, and is good enough to overcome Carson Beck being honestly kind of mediocre right now. Though we know he has it in him, it's one of those, well, is he mediocre right now because he hasn't need to be better than that, or because that's actually what he is? That's a whole other conversation. If Miami is playing Oregon in the national championship, I'm taking Miami, because again, if that's the case, we went through when we talked about the Oregon Texas Tech game, we talked about Dante Moore's numbers against the probably top six opponents that Oregon has played this year. And I think Miami's defense is better than all of these. I think Miami's defense right now, if they stay this hot, is better than IU's. I think it's better than Wisconsin's, Iowa's, USC's, Washington's, and Texas Tech's. I really think that. And we saw what Dante Moore did against all of these teams. Cumulatively, he threw 4 touchdowns and 5 picks. I think Miami's defense is good enough to win that game for them if if it comes to that. I agree with you that if they're playing Indiana, I'm taking the Hoosiers. Um, but I mean, if you ask me, my ideal national championship right now is Indiana Miami. I think that would be just insane. I also love all of Miami's success because Notre Dame fans are awfully quiet right now. Um, because they have to be, right? Because there isn't any more of this hypothetical with Notre Dame when Miami goes and wins these 2 games that they just won these last couple weeks. So anyway, it was a super exciting second round. I think it was definitely more exciting than we experienced last year. Though last year did have some awesome games in that second round. The Texas Arizona State double overtime game was pretty sweet.
Cam Scatterbo in that game,
Yeah,
unbelievable.
that was awesome. The Boise State Penn State game wasn't as great. The Georgia Notre Dame Sugar Bowl, the refs were way too involved, so that one was hard to enjoy. And Ohio State just absolutely torched Oregon in the Rose Bowl, which was like, okay, that was different to me of not being fun because it was like, okay, well, it's Ohio State, as opposed to the Rose Bowl this year where it's like, dude, this is freaking Indiana, like this. There's just a significant
Yeah,
difference with that. Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
it was a great
yeah.
great second round of the playoffs.
Yeah. The funny thing to me about this playoffs is it feels so chaotic because Ohio State's out, Georgia's out, Alabama's out. And it feels like, oh, anybody could win it. It's wide open. But the thing is, there's the feeling of it's wide open, anybody could win it. But then there's the other feeling of, what if Indiana just beats everybody by multiple scores to wrap up this playoffs? What if Indiana just wins by 10 or 14 against Oregon? What if Indiana just walks up and says, oh, Miami, we're going to beat you by 20? Like, it could happen. That's the ridiculous thing, that it feels wide open, or just the professional superstar team that's undefeated could just smoke everybody like they just did to Alabama by 30 whatever. And that's the ridiculous thing about it, that it could go either way.
For sure. All right. Well, next week is the next round of the college football playoff. It'll be super exciting to see what happens there. Enjoy those games next week. I won't promise that we'll talk to you before then because I might have a baby, and that will mean that there will be a break for me. But we'll see. We'll see how that sort of plays out. But enjoy the college football playoffs if we don't talk to you before then. Transfer portal is open as of today, so that'll start to heat up and get really interesting as well. And yeah, we're in for a really as much as we complain about the college football calendar, and we do, and there's reason to complain about it, we are in a really, really exciting part of the year for college football. And so that is really, really fun as well. So enjoy the games next week if we don't talk to you before then. And of course, as always, thank you so much for your support, and have a good one, everybody.